The church was silent, but the truth was screaming from beneath the floor. It all started with the small crack in the old wooden boards. Someone looked down and felt something was deeply wrong. It was the smell. It wasn't normal, not for a place of prayer. He called the others over. Minutes later, as they pried the boards apart, they uncovered a secret that would shock the entire town, a secret hidden beneath the quiet church. And at the center of it all was the man everyone trusted most, the priest. But how did it come to this? To understand, we have to go back to the beginning. The town of Blackridge was small, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where doors stayed unlocked, and people believed they were safe. At the heart of it all stood St. Michael's Church, tall, old, and peaceful. Every Sunday, it filled with soft voices, quiet prayers, and the gentle sound of footsteps on the stone floor. And at the front stood Father Daniel. He was calm, kind, and soft-spoken. People trusted him. Parents trusted him with their children. Families told him their deepest secrets. To the town, he wasn't just a priest. He was a guide, a protector, a man of God. But not everything was as it seemed. Father Daniel had arrived in Blackridge 10 years earlier. No one asked too many questions. He came with letters of recommendation, clean record, and a calm smile. That was enough. At first, everything about him felt right. He helped the poor, visited the sick, and listened without judging. People said he had a gift, that he understood pain and carried a quiet sadness of his own. But over time, small things began to feel off. Nothing big, nothing obvious, just small moments. A pause that lasted a little too long, a look that felt a little too cold, a silence that felt heavy. But in a place like Blackridge, people didn't question the priest. They trusted him, they believed in him, and that belief would blind them for years. The first disappearance happened on a rainy evening. Her name was Emily Carter. She was 16, bright, kind, and known by everyone. That night, she had gone to church alone. Her parents said she just needed some time to think, time to pray. She never came home. At first, people weren't too worried. Blackridge was safe. Things like that just didn't happen there. But when morning came and there was still no sign of Emily, fear began to spread. The police searched the town, the woods, the roads, every empty building. They found nothing. No clues, no answers, just silence. That night, Father Daniel led a prayer service. The church was full. People cried, held hands, and asked for answers. And Father Daniel stood at the front, speaking softly. Sometimes, he said, we don't understand God's plan. His voice was calm, steady, and comforting. But as he looked out over the crowd, his eyes didn't show fear or sadness. They showed something else, something hidden that no one noticed. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Emily Carter was never found. The town tried to move on, but something had changed. There was a crack now, a quiet fear, a question no one wanted to ask. Then it happened again. Another girl, Sophie Lane, 15, gone without a trace, last seen near the church. This time, people noticed. Whispers began to spread. 2 girls, both connected to the same place, the same street, the same path. But still, no one pointed a finger at Father Daniel. Not yet. The police returned. And this time, they looked closer. They questioned people. They searched again. They even visited the church. Father Daniel welcomed them, smiling, calm, and helpful. He answered every question, offered every detail. He even prayed with them before they left. To the officers, he seemed perfect, too perfect. But there was still no proof, no evidence, nothing to hold on to. Then came the third disappearance. This time, it wasn't a teenager. It was a young woman named Clara, who worked at a small shop near the church. She was friendly, quiet, and always polite. She was last seen closing the store late at night. The next morning, the door was locked, the lights were off, but Clara was gone. 3 people, all missing, all connected somehow to the same part of town. The fear was no longer quiet. It was loud, real, and heavy. And still, every Sunday, Father Daniel stood at the front of the church, speaking of hope, of faith, of trust. And the town listened because they needed something to believe in. even as everything around them began to fall apart. One night, a man named Thomas Reed walked into the police station. He looked nervous, shaken. He said he'd seen something strange, something he couldn't explain. He worked late and drove past the church almost every night. But a few days ago, something was different. He saw lights on inside, very late, too late, and he saw someone, a figure, carrying something heavy, moving quickly from the back door toward the old storage building behind the church. At first, he thought nothing of it, but then he remembered the disappearances, and something didn't feel right. The police listened carefully. It wasn't much, but it was something. For the first time, they decided to look closer at the church, not just the public areas. Everything. The next morning, officers arrived quietly and respectfully. They told Father Daniel it was routine, just another check. He smiled, nodded, and let them in. But as they walked through the halls, something changed. The air felt different, heavier, colder. They searched the main rooms and offices, finding nothing. Then they moved toward the back, to the old storage area, a place rarely used and locked most of the time. Father Daniel hesitated, just for a second. Then he reached into his pocket and handed over the key. The door creaked open and dust filled the air. The room was dark, quiet, and still. At first, it looked empty, just old boxes, broken furniture, forgotten things. But then one officer noticed something about the floor. The wood didn't match the rest. It looked newer, out of place, like it had been changed recently. "Did you fix this?" the officer asked. Father Daniel paused for a moment, then nodded. "Yes," he said softly. "It was damaged." The officer didn't respond. He just stared at the floor, then called the others over. Minutes later, they brought tools. Carefully and slowly, they began to pull the boards apart. The first board came loose, then another, and then the smell hit. Sharp, heavy, and wrong. The officers froze. No one needed to say it out loud. They all felt it. Something was buried there. Something that wasn't supposed to be. One officer stepped back. Another covered his nose. And then they all looked up at Father Daniel. But this time, he wasn't smiling. As the boards lifted higher, something began to show beneath the floor. Something dark, something hidden. Something that had been kept secret for far too long. And in that moment, the truth about Father Daniel was about to come to light. But what they were about to uncover would be far worse than anyone imagined. And it would change Blackridge forever. The room froze. No one moved. No one spoke. The smell rising from beneath the floor was enough to tell them. This was no ordinary discovery. One officer slowly knelt down. Carefully, he brushed away the loose dirt beneath the broken boards. Another officer turned away, unable to look. The silence inside that small storage room felt heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. And behind them, Father Daniel stood still, watching, not saying a word. "Call it in," one officer finally said. His voice was low, controlled, but shaken. Within minutes, more officers arrived, then investigators, then forensic teams. The small church in Blackridge was no longer a place of quiet prayer. It had become a crime scene. The area was sealed. Tape stretched across the doors. No one in, no one out. The townspeople gathered outside, whispering, confused, afraid. They watched as police moved in and out of the building. No one knew exactly what was happening, but everyone felt it. Something was very wrong. Inside, the investigators worked carefully. Every movement was slow, every step controlled. The dirt beneath the floor was removed piece by piece. And then, they saw it. Cloth. Faded. Buried deep. One of the investigators closed his eyes for a second, then nodded. They kept digging. The truth was no longer hidden. It was right there. Beneath the place where people came to pray. Beneath the place they believed was safe. The room grew colder, heavier, and as the investigation continued, it became clear this was not just one secret. There was more, much more. Outside, the news began to spread. First as whispers, then as shock. Blackridge was no longer the quiet town people thought it was. Now, it was the center of something dark, something no one wanted to believe. Father Daniel was taken in for questioning. He didn't resist. He didn't argue. He simply nodded and followed the officers, still calm, still quiet. But this time, people noticed something different. He didn't look like a man of peace anymore. He looked like a man hiding something. At the station, he sat in a small room. Plain walls, a single table, a single light. Two detectives sat across from him. They didn't rush. They didn't accuse. Not yet. They simply asked questions. "Father Daniel," one detective began, "we need you to explain what we found." He folded his hands, took a slow breath, and spoke softly. "I don't know what you're talking about." The detectives exchanged a look. They had heard this before, but something about the way he said it felt different, too calm, too controlled. "Then help us understand," the second detective said. "You repaired the floor. You had access to that room. And now, we've found something buried there." Father Daniel looked down at his hands. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he looked up. "I fix many things in the church," he said. "It is an old building." The answers were careful, measured, but they didn't explain anything. And the more he spoke, the more questions appeared. Meanwhile, back at the church, the investigation continued, and what they found next made everything worse. Beneath the first layer, there was more cloth, more hidden remains, more evidence that this had been done more than once. The investigators worked in silence. No one needed to say it out loud anymore. This was not an accident. This was not a single act. This was a pattern. 3 missing people, and now, multiple discoveries beneath the church. The connection was no longer a question. It was a reality. Detectives began building a timeline. Emily Carter, Sophie Lane, Clara, all had been seen near the church before they vanished. All had trusted the same place, the same person. Back in the interrogation room, the pressure slowly increased. The detectives changed their approach. They brought photos, maps, records. They placed them carefully on the table, not aggressively, just enough to make a point. "We know they were here," one detective said quietly. "We know they trusted this place." He paused, then added, "And we know you were here too." Father Daniel didn't react right away. He stared at the table, at the papers, at the evidence. Then he spoke. "They came for help," he said softly. The detectives leaned forward. "Who did?" "The girls," he replied. "They came because they were lost." The room went still. For the first time, he wasn't denying everything. He was saying something different, something that made the situation even more unsettling. "What do you mean, lost?" the detective asked. Father Daniel looked up. His eyes were calm, too calm. "They were searching," he said, "for something to believe in." The detectives exchanged another look. This wasn't a confession, but it wasn't innocence either. It was something in between, something unclear, something dangerous. Hours passed, questions repeated, answers circled, but nothing solid came out. Not yet. Back in Blackridge, the town was changing. People stopped talking to each other the same way. Parents held their children closer. Doors that once stayed unlocked were now closed tight. And the church, the place that once felt safe, now felt like a shadow. Then came another discovery, one that would push the case even further. In Father Daniel's private room inside the church, investigators found a box, locked, hidden behind a shelf. It wasn't large, but it was carefully placed, like something meant to be forgotten. They opened it. Inside were personal items, a bracelet, a small necklace, a folded piece of clothing, each one carefully kept, carefully stored, like memories or trophies. The room went silent again. Every item told a story, and none of those stories were good. When the items were shown to the families, everything changed. The quiet hope they had been holding onto was gone, replaced by something much heavier, something final. Back in the interrogation room, the detectives returned. This time, they placed the items on the table, one by one, carefully. Father Daniel looked at them, and for the first time, something in his expression changed, just slightly, but enough. "Do you recognize these?" the detective asked. He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the objects. Then he slowly nodded. "They belong to them," he said. The room froze. The detectives leaned in. This was it. This was the moment everything could change. How did they get here? one detective asked. Father Daniel took a deep breath. His calm voice returned. They left them behind. The answer didn't make sense. It didn't explain anything. It only made things darker, more confusing, more disturbing. Outside, night began to fall over Blackridge. The streets were quiet. The church stood in the distance, surrounded by silence. No lights, no voices, just the weight of everything that had been uncovered. Inside the station, the questioning continued, but the truth was still just out of reach. Close, but not clear. And then, just as the detectives prepared to push further, Father Daniel leaned forward, slightly, and spoke in a low voice. "You're looking in the wrong place," he said. The detectives stopped. Every instinct told them this mattered. "What do you mean?" one of them asked. Father Daniel looked directly at them. His calm expression returned. But this time, there was something else behind it. Something colder, something deeper. "There are things you haven't found," he said. The room went completely silent, because in that moment, it became clear, this case was bigger than they thought, darker than they imagined, and whatever was still hidden, was waiting to be discovered. But where, and how much more was there? The room went completely silent. The detective stared at Father Daniel. No one moved. No one spoke. Because what he had just said changed everything. "There are things you haven't found." Those words echoed in the small room. Not loud, not angry, just calm. Too calm. One detective leaned forward. "What haven't we found?" he asked. Father Daniel didn't answer right away. He sat back in his chair, as if thinking, or maybe remembering. Then he smiled, just a little, and that small smile sent a chill through the room. "You'll see," he said. That was all. No explanation, no detail, just a quiet warning. The investigation changed that night. It was no longer just about what had already been discovered. Now, it was about what was still hidden. Back at the church, the search expanded. Every room, every wall, every inch of the building. Nothing was ignored anymore. Not the floors, not the ceilings, not even the ground outside. Forensic teams worked through the night. Lights filled the dark corners of the church. The peaceful silence that once lived there was gone, replaced by movement, by questions, by fear. Behind the church, there was an old garden, small, overgrown, barely used. It had been there for years. Most people didn't even notice it anymore. But now, it mattered. One of the investigators stood at the edge of the garden, looking down. The soil looked disturbed, not fresh, but not untouched either, like something had been moved long ago, and then covered again. "Start here," he said. The digging began, slow, careful, every movement controlled, because now, they knew what they were looking for, and they knew what it could mean. Hours passed, the night grew deeper, the air colder, and then, they found something. It wasn't obvious at first, just a small object, half buried, covered in dirt. One of the investigators picked it up, cleaned it gently, and stared. It was a ring. Simple, but personal. When it was shown to the team, no one spoke, because they already understood. This wasn't random. This wasn't nothing. This was another piece of the truth. And if there was one thing buried there, there could be more. Back at the station, the detectives returned to Father Daniel. This time, they didn't ask softly. They didn't wait. "We found something in the garden," one of them said. Father Daniel didn't react. He just listened. "A ring," the detective continued. "Do you want to tell us how it got there?" Silence. Then, a slow breath. "They leave things behind," Father Daniel said quietly. The answer was the same. Careful, detached, like he wasn't part of it, like he was only watching. But the detectives were no longer confused. They were certain. This was not coincidence. This was control. "Who leaves them behind?" the detective asked. Father Daniel looked up, his eyes steady, unmoving. "They do," he said. The room felt smaller, heavier, because now, it was clear, he wasn't going to explain. Not in a normal way, not directly. So the detectives changed their approach. They stopped asking what, and started asking why. Why were they here? One detective said. For the first time, Father Daniel paused longer than usual. His hands tightened slightly, then relaxed. "They trusted me," he said. The words were simple, but the meaning behind them was heavy. "And what did you do with that trust?" the detective asked. The silence that followed was different. Not empty, not calm, but full of something waiting to break. And then, slowly, Father Daniel spoke. "I helped them," he said. The detectives didn't react. They let him continue. "They were lost," he added. "Confused. Searching for something they couldn't find." His voice stayed soft, steady, almost gentle. "I gave them peace." The words hung in the air, cold, unclear, but deeply wrong. Because now, the truth wasn't just about what happened. It was about how he saw it, how he believed it. Back at the church, the digging continued. And the deeper they went, the more they found. More items, more hidden signs, more pieces of a story no one wanted to hear. Each discovery made one thing clear. This had been happening for a long time. Quietly, carefully, hidden behind kindness, hidden behind trust. Blackridge was no longer searching for answers. They were facing them. The next morning, the news spread across the town. Then beyond it, people gathered outside their homes, outside the church, outside the police station, all asking the same question. How did we not see this? Parents thought about the times they had trusted him, the conversations, the smiles, the comfort. Now, all of it felt different. Every memory changed. Inside the station, the final piece of the case came together. The evidence, the timeline, the pattern, it all pointed to one person, Father Daniel. When he was formally charged, he didn't resist. He didn't argue. He didn't even seem surprised. As he was led away, the town watched, silently. The man they once believed in was now the man they feared. The trial that followed was long, careful, every detail examined, every piece of evidence presented. The courtroom was full, not just with people, but with emotion, shock, anger, confusion. And through it all, Father Daniel remained the same, quiet, calm, almost distant. When asked to speak, he didn't deny everything, but he didn't fully explain either. "I did what I believed was right," he said. The words didn't bring comfort. They didn't bring understanding. They only made everything harder to accept. In the end, the court made its decision, based on evidence, on facts, on the truth that could no longer be hidden. Justice was carried out. But for Blackridge, the story didn't end there. The church remained. The building still stood. But it was no longer the same. Some people refused to go back. Others tried, but couldn't forget. Because beneath that place, beneath those floors, was a truth that would never fully disappear. Years later, people still spoke about it. Quietly, carefully, like something fragile, something heavy. They spoke about trust, about how easily it can be given, and how dangerous it can be in the wrong hands. Father Daniel was gone, but the memory of what happened stayed. And in the end, the most terrifying part of the story was not what was hidden beneath the church, but how long it stayed hidden, right in front of everyone. If you enjoy true crime documentaries, criminal investigations, and real-life mystery cases, this story offers a gripping look into how a small-town case can uncover deeper truths. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories and investigative documentaries.